One thing I never really get tired of doing here in my kitchen is baking and experimenting with different grains and flavors. Especially in the wintertime, it makes it cozy. Even though I have these spring flowers here, it is still very much winter. I might sometimes get tired of coming up with another meal and feeding dinner. I mean, obviously we do it. We've got to do it. But baking is truly a joy to me. I love playing around with new recipes and adapting old recipes by adding in maybe some millet here or apples or cranberries, maybe a spice. It is very fun to mix and match and play around with it. And because I have a lot of children, a lot of hungry eaters, none of it goes to waste, and it's always appreciated and enjoyed. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I am baking for my family this week, some of the things that we've been enjoying this winter time, some of the adaptations I'm making, which has a lot to do with whole grains because I've been baking pretty much exclusively with whole grains lately in my kitchen, and I love to share how that's working out, how I can adapt regular recipes to make them work for us. I have been making a whole grain bread recipe for a while. I was adapting it from a recipe on my blog, and then I was playing around with it, and I had it to where I was doing about 4 cups of flour for 2 loaves, and I decided to scale that up and make it a bit of a larger loaf. It's hard to find sometimes that sweet spot, that balance of making enough, because if you already have bread going, you might as well completely fill the loaf pans, but also not wanting to overflow them. So this is what I have currently settled on for my whole grain bread recipe. When I feel like I have this totally down, I'm going to be posting it over on my blog, farmhousehanboon.com. Super, super simple. My mom, my sisters, everybody in my family is making their bread this way now because we are all really focusing on whole grains. And it's really simple. So I'm doing 2 1/4 cups of water, a 1/2 cup each of oil and honey. Now I find that if you do the oil before the honey just slides right out and doesn't make your cup measurer a mess. Tablespoon of salt, 2 eggs, a 1/2 cup of starter, and 7 cups of freshly milled hard wheat. Now you can do hard white wheat, you can do hard red wheat. What I do caution you against is using soft wheat berries because they don't have the same gluten structure that you're looking for when you do the stretch and folds. We will use soft white wheat for some other recipes that I'm going to work on today. And then I will just bring this dough together with my hands, and throughout the day, I will do stretch and folds. So it's just going to sit here in the back with a wet tea towel over top so it doesn't dry out while I work on something else. When we recently moved back to town after being in the country on well water for many years, I knew that we needed something convenient and easy to be able to get water from the tap that didn't smell like pool water, which it definitely did beforehand. I want to tell you about today's video sponsor, Aquasana. Aquasana offers filtration systems that provide maximum contaminant reduction while leaving beneficial minerals like potassium, calcium, magnesium in the water. Aquasana uses award-winning filtration technology that's designed by expert engineers and inspired by you. The Clarium Direct Connect is an easy install under sink system. It allows for instant access to filtered water from any existing faucet with no dedicated faucet required. It can attach to your cold water line for water for drinking, washing vegetables, watering plants, filling a pot of water for noodles. This filter is a great option for renters or someone who doesn't want to have an extra hole when installing a second faucet. It's relatively easy to install and can be moved if needed. This system reduces 78 contaminants, including chlorine, lead, pesticides, cysts, microplastics, and more. With exposure to environmental toxins on the rise, filtering your water is essential. Start drinking cleaner, healthier water this year. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description to get 55% off all systems, $49 and up, plus free shipping. Now, every family has a little arsenal of recipes that are your go-to when you have nothing else planned for dinner. So this might be like an easy box of whole grain pasta with ground beef and marinara sauce, because you don't have to thaw out ground beef. You can just put it in some hot water or put it in a Dutch oven with the lid on and a little bit of water. One of our favorite go-to fast food meals is biscuits and gravy, because I can take wheat berries, mill them, and make a quick, very nourishing, healthy biscuit. And then I can also take sausage out of the freezer, and just like with ground beef, I can put it in some hot water to let it thaw a bit, or open it and put it directly into a cast iron Dutch oven with a bit of water with the lid on so it thaws out. Now today I actually already had sausage thawed out, so that step was completely done. And sausage is one of those things that I throw a bunch of in the fridge at the beginning of the week in a dish so it doesn't, drip down or anything in the fridge, so that I can use it for various things, whether it's for breakfast or some kind of quick meal like meatballs or biscuits and gravy in this case. I love having sausage thawed out for that, and making a quick whole grain biscuit comes together fast. So if you have no real plans for dinner, you can serve homemade biscuits and gravy with sauerkraut, with avocados, with scrambled eggs. You can bring that whole meal together really fast without having to really have thought about it much. Another recipe I need to get on the blog, but isn't on there yet, are these whole grain biscuits. Now, some of the considerations: if you use soft white wheat berries, which is what I'm going to be mentioning here, you'll do 5 cups of flour, but if you do hard white or hard red, you'll do 4 cups. This is a trick I learned when I had Sue Becker on my podcast, the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. This is something that she recommends scaling up a bit when you're using soft white wheat berries, and I really do find that it works great. Now, if you do have in stock soft white wheat berries in your pantry, it really does taste so much better. So my recipe is 5 cups of freshly milled soft white wheat berries, 2 tablespoons baking powder, 2 tablespoons sugar, 2 teaspoons salt, 12 tablespoons butter, and 1.5 cups of whole milk. So just like with any biscuit recipe, mix the dry ingredients together, cut in the butter. I like to do this by hand, add the milk, and then rolling them out, I like to create several folds. Like I fold it over and then roll it out and then fold it over again. This is what creates those big flaky layers. Instead of using a biscuit cutter, I'm going to make this really easy by just cutting it in rectangles, so I don't have to re-roll it out and keep cutting. I just cut right down the middle and cut, the 12 biscuits, and then serve it up with some homemade gravy. I'll revisit my bread dough to do a quick stretch and fold before getting another baked good going. Now, I don't always bake this much in one day, but I do like to do that. Batch baking is handy because you're using all the same ingredients and cup measurers. Like I'll already have out the baking soda, the baking powder, the sugar, the flour, the buckets of grains. It does make it really simple because I don't wash bowls and spoons and cups in between. I just do it all at one time and then do a cleanup, and it makes it really straightforward. You also don't have to bake everything in one day. So if you're doing several sourdough recipes, you can get them all going for their bulk ferment. And then the next day, cover the ones that you don't want to bake, put them in the fridge, and let them continue to ferment very slowly in the fridge until the day you're actually ready to bake, where you would just take it out of the fridge, shape it, let it do its second rise, and bake it. A lot of times I'm not even planning to make as many things as I do, but I mill the flour and then I just see how much I have left, and I keep making things or feed my starter until the flour is gone, because freshly milled loses a lot of nutritional value as it sits. And so I try to use it all up at one time. Once it's baked, it doesn't continue to lose nutritional value. So I don't mind just making something, even if I plan for my kids to eat it the next day. Now, of course, who are we kidding? If you're going to make some chocolate chip muffins, they're going to get eaten that same day. So if you head over to farmhouseonmoon.com and search muffins, there's a sourdough blueberry muffin recipe. I just made that exact thing, except for I put in chocolate chips instead of blueberries, and I did freshly milled soft white wheat berries instead of all-purpose flour. I do another quick stretch and fold on my bread, and then I'll just let that ferment the rest of the day until I revisit it tomorrow. And now we're going to jump into a very fun bagel variation. Many months ago, maybe a year ago, I can't remember who sent it to me, but somebody that watches me on YouTube sent me something that they've been making in their own kitchen, and I saved it in my notes, and I'm just now revisiting it. But she said that she replaces about half the water in the bagel recipe with orange juice, adds some orange zest and cranberries, and makes a cranberry orange bagel, which I thought sounded like such a great idea, especially for kind of a wintertime take. Now, I am making these bagels with whole grain. They are not as good with whole grain. And a lot of things, I shouldn't even say not as good, very different. I was just talking about this with Anya from Our Gabled Home on the podcast, and we were encouraging bakers to not have the expectation that a whole grain recipe will be the same. It's beautiful and it's nourishing, but it will not be the same. And that is the case for bagels. I have to say, with some things I prefer whole grain. The taste, it's just, there's a depth there that is just kind of bland with all purpose. But with some things, I prefer all purpose. And I think bagels is one. But for the health benefits that it provides, I really do appreciate whole grain bagels, and it can definitely be done. So I'm just mixing up the recipe as usual, except for two things. I'm doubling it and I'm using hard white wheat berries, but otherwise subbing it all 1 for 1. And of course, like the whole cranberry orange thing. But if you look for the bagels on farmhouseonboone.com, it's the same amount of everything except for it's hard white wheat. I doubled it and I replaced some of the water with orange and added cranberry. So you following me there? Not everything has a recipe because I use the basic recipe and then I play around with it and use that original recipe as the guide, and that really helps. I let the bagel dough and the bread dough sit all night at room temperature. As you can see, the bread dough rises fantastically. The bagel dough, on the other hand, doesn't rise a lot. Now, if it's all purpose, it rises more, but still not a ton because it's a very dense dough. I will divide and shape the bread, allow that to rise until doubled. Now I put that in a warm spot so I can accelerate the second half of the process and we can actually eat this bread today. For the bagels, since I doubled the recipe, I'll divide them into 16 equal parts, shape them, allow them to rise, and then I will boil and bake them according to the usual recipe instructions. Bagels might be something that sounds intimidating because usually you get bagels at a bakery, but if you are brand new to baking, I would encourage you to start with bagels because they are so simple. You don't really have to knead the dough because it's quite a dense dough. You can bring it together with a dough hook in your mixer, but it doesn't really need, even if you're doing all purpose, it's just so dense it doesn't develop in that way. So if you have never done any sourdough, starting with like a basic all-purpose bagel sprinkled with some bagel seasoning, maybe not adding cranberries because they pop out, they're harder to shape. They're a little bit harder to shape when you do whole grain, but starting with like a very basic all-purpose bagel, there's no kneading, it's very straightforward. I think that it's probably one of the easiest places to start. You also, once the dough comes together, let it rise for a really long time. It doesn't over ferment very easily because it's so dense. So if you let it go overnight, that's totally fine. There really is just quite a large margin for error on this one. To the bagel boiling water, I do add some baking soda and preferably brown sugar. I only had white sugar this time. Definitely over baked my bread loaves. I should have set the timer, but I didn't. I like to do about 350 degrees for 30 minutes. These bagels are delicious, topped with cream cheese and honey. Also so good toasted. Add some cream cheese and bacon and eggs. Something about the cranberry with the bacon and eggs, especially when toasted, is good. I've been having that for breakfast just about every day lately. Well, I hope that you can stay cozy the rest of this winter. We will get through it. Baking will help. Thank you so much for watching.